So welcome to the Lloyd's Futureset Business Leaders Series. This is the first in the series. My name's John Neal, I'm the CEO of Lloyd's, and it's a real pleasure to have Dom Christian with me today, Global Chairman at Aon. And I think we were going to talk to you about energy, but it would be remiss not to introduce the conversation with a bit of discussion around the first war we've seen in Europe for 60, 70 years and all of the complications that's bringing to society, let alone customers and our industry. But Dom, perhaps you could start with a few words on the war.
Yeah, and thank you, John, for having me with you. It's a great honour to be here. I think I'm still in shock, even 15 months later. It's still a surprise to me. Something like 300,000 soldiers, men and women, have died. Europe's largest nation by landmass and by population is in conflict, at war with the second largest nation by landmass. I find that difficult to compute. I haven't seen war in this way as localised in my life. The impact is extraordinary, not just on people's lives or those local communities, but citizens, but globally. It is a global impact. More locally for Aon, it touches us very significantly because we still have today 47 people transacting insurance in our Kiev office today.
Wow.
And as you know, there is a fully functioning insurance market still continuing despite it all.
That amazed me because we had that conversation, didn't we, when we were talking both with governments and regulators as to what did reconstruction look like, what would manufacturing look like, could insurance be provided. We were surprised, weren't we, just how functioning the market actually was.
It is. I mean, there's still $1 billion of premium transacted. It was 1.5 or so. Most lines, so if your car is being insured for third party, most properties ex-war damage are insured, which is staggering. But the economic impact is also not just locally, but is of such significance, which leads to the interconnectedness of risk. Probably interest rates have risen by, what do you think, 2% because of it? Inflation, 4 or 5% just because of the war. GDP reduction, 1%. I don't know, you'll have different figures, and the economists listening will have different figures. But that economic impact is huge, which leads to so many things that we have to think and care about.
It's quite interesting. You mentioned interconnectedness, which we sort of get, but the debates on energy security, the debates on cost of living have reverberated, as you say, around the world. So when we take a step back and think of energy, where I introduced the conversation, you and I talk about this a bit, don't we, in terms of, when we think of our industry and our industry's responsibility to customers, the like of the world that we see today, when you've got financial challenges, whether it's inflation or interest rates, you've got systemic exposures evidenced by COVID, you've got the climate debate. I think when we go back over 100 years or 150 or 200 years, we just haven't seen anything quite like this, have we? So, the world is super uncertain. What are customers saying to you and saying to your colleagues that they need help in doing or thinking or giving them some guidance?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with your assessment about the last 200 years and where risk stands relative to that. I think what's happened is, I don't know about you, John, but in fact, we talked about this a lot over the last 20 years. We've been talking about new risks for 20 years, contemporary risks, whether it's cyber or supply chain, pandemic, and more recently. But actually, we're now reminding ourselves of old risks, inflation, trade wars, nuclear worries and anxiety and so forth. So now we've got the whole risk universe that we have to think about, I think, in a very different way to however we've ever thought about it. Because risk lives in our phone, risk lives on our doorstep, risk lives on our desk, as well as risk living in that sort of macro world where it's always lived and sort of touches us without us probably realising.
It's unusual, isn't it, to see the components. So we started the conversation with war, which we thought we understood, but we understood it more through a history book than through reality. So as you say, that's a bit of a shock. But to see war, to see financial risk, to see systemic risk all play out. I mean, dare I say it, the good news for us is I think we're in the business of confidence giving. I think that's our job, isn't it? When we talk about businesses need the confidence to make the brave decisions that they've got to make. So this is one of those unusual times when in our industry we've got to stand up, haven't we, really? And represent the best of what we can do.
Totally agree. And we are these new words that I've learnt, at least, you may have known them, but like polycrises and permacrises. Well, in a way, insurance is always in that.
Yeah.
We're always financial first responders. We're always trying to deal with crises. We're also trying to help organisations grow. So there's the sort of challenge of defence, if you like. There's also the challenge of growth. And where it takes us, I think, the challenge of the risks that we've been introduced to through Ukraine and through the contemporary world is to how it is we assist organisations, clients, citizens, communities and so forth in terms of their anxieties, but also how we give them the opportunity to grow as people, as organisations and so forth.
Can I just pick up on that point? Because that plays quite nicely into the climate debate, because we talk about it a lot. Is it opportunity? Is
Absolutely.
it threat? And obviously, when you and I talk about it, we say, well, actually, it's the biggest change that we've seen in our lifetime. So we break it down into the three components that you've just referenced. You've got resilience, you've got transition and growth. Let's just explore a little bit each of those. What does resilience means? Because we've got everyone talking to us, haven't we? How do we support energy companies? You've got NGOs accusing you of not acting quickly enough. What does resilience mean, you think? What's our responsibility?
I think the first thing I love your the way you sort of thought about the three types of things we're endeavouring to do. I think the first thing to say to all of those three is this isn't new for us, climate. To our certain knowledge, the first climate model was built in 1985 in insurance. Now, whether it was a climate change model, question mark, but it was a climate model. We've been trying to understand weather for all of our careers, John. And so we have this enormous experience in this, enormous knowledge of it. But when I think of what we're doing, the area where we've got to be resilience or growth or any of the areas that you've correctly categorised, the thing that perhaps with clients, perhaps generally we don't talk to enough, is how we understand risk. So we've got massive build-outs of risk understanding around climate.
Yes.
I mean, extraordinary knowledge. And we don't bring that knowledge sufficiently of understanding risk to clients, or possibly to each other. We certainly don't bring it to other communities sufficiently.
Interesting. I think one of the unusual things about our industry, and when we look at it from our perspective, we can do two different things, can't we? Because if transition's taking place, then it's back to my confidence point.
Absolutely.
A customer needs to know that their balance sheet or their P&L is protected. We've also got this unusual flow of money. So a quarter of the money that sits within financial services rests with an insurer. So we've got that ability to put the financing up. So it's when we think about transition, we've got an unusual mix, haven't we, of, whether they're the companies that need to abate and change, how do we support them, whether it's new energy. So how do you think about each when you're thinking through a big Aon lens? What does it mean to energy companies? Do you want to be associated with them or not? And what does it mean to those that are looking at new technology?
So I've often heard you reference the 30 trillion of insurance assets that can be.
A lot of money.
It's got a lot to
a lot
be.
of money.
And it's sort of so on the one side, one can think of that and how we advise around that. But I think what we're really talking about is more the liability side of the balance sheet and companies' risk. So if we take energy and climate specifically, we're actually talking about natural resources. How do we insure natural resources? We have done this for decades, centuries. And I think we've done it pretty well. Claims have been paid significantly, all sorts of policy forms have been created. And what we're trying to do this is now for other forms of natural resources, but it's still within the overall headline of natural resources. So we need to think through lithium in a similar way, perhaps, in terms of insurance to other mining projects that we thought about in the past. But actually lithium is actually a green mineral, if you like, or supporting the green agenda. It doesn't mean we can leave behind everything else, because that ain't going to help us actually. When we talk about sustainability, it can't be just the thought of 20 years' time or 50 years' time. Sustainability is also about now. So we have to provide, I'm sorry about the expression, but within the transition, we have to continue to provide the support we do provide, but in a way that is ethical and thought through and careful and attentive and showing that we understand client risk always, and then showing how we can use capital to support that risk. And that might be some old risks that I was referring to earlier. And what Ukraine probably has done, I hope this is wrong, probably has done is sort of interfere with the process of the green progression. It certainly, I don't think it delays it horrifically. I'm not in that camp of 2030 and 1.5 isn't going to be achieved for a moment, because I think we will get to it, but it's making it harder. And then for insurance, it's making it harder. We've still got to deal more with some of the risks that perhaps are less appealing to us in some ways in terms of the green transition, but doesn't mean we can't continue and shouldn't continue to support them in some way.
Yeah, well, I think we're both quite strong. It's not our job to set policy. You know,
absolutely.
We've got to respect government's position. Government's representing society.
100%.
So whether it's Kyoto in 2005 or the Paris Agreement 2015 or the IRA Act that's getting all the plaudits it deserves coming in the US in 2022, it's government's job to set policy,
100%.
isn't it? We've got to operate within the frameworks that government set for us, but do that as constructively as we can. So when you think of other bodies, because it's all well and good saying that, so who's making a difference? What's adding value to the discussion? What's helping?
Well, if I could talk about who's making a difference locally in
Yes.
insurance, if you like, in our sector. And I think the organisations that are making the greatest difference are those within the insurance sector who are talking to other sectors. And insurance, you know, the old best kept secret and all that sort of stuff. We need to change that. For me, if I look at the insurance entities within our industry that are doing great things in a collaborative but respecting competitive challenges way, I particularly like the Sustainable Market Initiative. Great, and this is, make sure this is recorded. Great plaudits to John and to Rebecca.
Good plug.
But no big. And one of the reasons I like it so much, you have your 16 verticals. You're leading the insurance one. If we look at trying to get the 185 global CEOs, and they really are global CEOs, to talk to us.
Yes.
Believe me, that's the sort of forum we can find conversations through. Far harder to find natural linkages for those conversations elsewhere. So the genius of it is actually that we have that connectivity now, and actually we can talk about the totality of the services we offer, which is not always services that are familiar to CEOs of the giant companies. Actually, they think D&O, they think cyber, but they may not think about the sort of things we're talking about now. And so through SMI Brilliant, we do have other organisations, as you know, ClimateWise has been going for 20 odd years, and that's doing really insurance risk research. IDF is doing public-private and looking to help the underserved. And I can go on with other organisations, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on within the industry. And actually what I think it's beginning to do a good job of, and SMI I think leads the way on this, is actually talk outside the industry more, which is what we need most of all, because most of all it's about we proving to our clients that we can bring something to them that actually they find interesting and perhaps is something they're unaware of. Because what we're trying to do is, back to the theme, is understand their risk, then ask them whether we think it's, and this is how we would sensibly translate that risk and transfer it, and in the process, therefore help them grow.
I think it's always interesting, and you know, I've had this. I think on a bad day, if I have a bad day, unfortunately I don't have many of them, you think, does anybody actually buy insurance when they don't have to? I've got to buy motor insurance because the law says I have to. I've got to insure my house because otherwise I can't get a mortgage. The beauty of insurance at the other end of the spectrum is it's infinitely variable. Everyone thinks it's a 1-year policy. You can have a 10-year policy. You can have a 15-year policy. You can get some financing. So the wonderful thing about the SMI parallel you've drawn is that you've got real business leaders sat there, and we're quite good, or we like to think at our best, we're trying to understand what is your problem.
Exactly.
How can we help that problem translate?
Exactly.
What can we do to support you? Ultimately, it's via a document that is financial in consideration, because that's what's worrying you. But we can be infinitely flexible about the way in which we look at the problem, can't we?
We can, and we can also do the sort of, if you like, by no means easy, but perhaps more easily thought about innovative products. So we are, as you know, there's 2 very large carbon storage programs in the market at the moment. And you could say, well, actually, of course, we have been insuring that risk for some time. We have been insuring some of the liability components of it. But now these are huge possibilities. And if we're to really support the green transition, actually, at least half of it will be around storage, I would think, to get to the sort of numbers we want to get to, or whatever that is, whether it's half or 40%. Who knows, but it's something like that. So we're beginning to do a much better job on risk storage, I think. And we're also, if you look at the size of the renewable market, it's still a relatively small market. You know, but it's now, I mean, it's nearly, we think about 2 billion. But actually, if you look at the growth of that in the last year, it's the fastest growing market in the world. It was a premium, in our judgment. So fascinating, isn't it? And of course, what we really need to find is sort of very interesting products, more around how it is we think about carbon offsets and how we think about insurances play into that. And there are a number of products beginning to emerge from different carriers, different brokers, certainly own, if I might say, that think about that subject. And if we can sort of crack that subject, I think, and at the same time, really prove that we are the innovative organisation as a sector that we think we are, then I think we'll do a really good job of advancing society.
Yeah. I think we've covered some interesting ground, because I think if we wanted to leave one message, it's our ability to offer real partnership, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that operates at very different levels. You know, when you think about some of the points you were making about the complexity of climate-related activity, you know, whether that could be public and private partnership.
Absolutely.
Can we help governments with some of the complex issues that they're dealing with different parts of the world? We'd say the answer to that question is yes. When it gets to businesses that are thinking about transition, can we give them the long-term commitment they need? We think the answer there is yes, which kind of leaves government itself having to think about the consumer, which is really where they should be thinking, to allow these complex financial and transitional decisions to be made, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and if you look at the language of insurance, and I forgive anyone listening who's not so connected to insurance, but two big words are mutuality and syndication.
Yeah.
But these suggest collaboration, and they're at the heart of what we do. And so it's within the sort of culture of insurance is this spirit of collaboration.
Yes.
Which is why I'd love to stay in it, actually.
Yes.
Kind of like and I think if we can bring more of that, more of the talents and gifts that we have, and actually the expertise, which, as we were saying earlier, goes back at least 40 years in certain areas of climate risk. You know, we've got, we're in the Lloyd's building today, but we've got, I think we have 6,000 people within 100 metres of here thinking about climate risk every day. Do you think of climate underwriters? You think of climate brokers, which are called catastrophe treaty brokers in our language, and. That pool of expertise, I don't know where that lives, that level of expertise in such a concentrated way, if I might say, anywhere.
So I'm just hoping that we've whetted your appetite with the first in the series of the Lloyd's Futureset discussions, and it'll encourage you to dial in and listen to the next one. Thank you. Thank you, Dom.
John.
Thanks for being with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.